Hal joins us yet again. Hal, I want to put up on the screen this very iconic photo that no doubt you have seen of Mikhail Gorbachev, George H.W. Bush, and Ronald Reagan in New York City, looking away, I guess, from Lower Manhattan, the Twin Towers in the background. A lot has changed in 30 years since that photo was taken. Your first reactions today when you got the news?
I wasn't surprised because I'd heard he was in ill health. You know, he was 91 years old, and frankly, you know, Russian life expectancy isn't that great to begin with. So the fact he lived so long was pretty remarkable. My next thought was that he did a lot of things that made sure that we didn't end up in a third world war, and you really can't understate the significance of the changes he made in the Soviet Union. You know, glasnost, the openness, where there was people were actually talking about some of the failings, which he got criticism because there were so many problems with Soviet society that once you uncorked that, there was a lot of criticism that was out there, a lot of frustration. Perestroika, the restructuring thing, he tried to do that, but you know, there were just so many institutional, bureaucratic, deep bureaucratic failures within Soviet society. I think at the end, that's probably the one thing that really, you know, destroyed what he was trying to do in terms of reforming the Soviet Union and not actually causing the collapse of the Soviet Union, which is what eventually happened. But some of those problems, you know, there are some big things that we kind of gloss over. Chernobyl in '86, you know, that started as a, you know, a horrific, the worst nuclear accident we've ever had. Huge explosion, massive radiation. So many people died, others irradiated and then later died of cancer, wiping out huge areas of territory. Some of those areas, of course, turned into this battlefield during this during the Ukraine war when they were coming in from the north. But that was initially covered up by the Soviet Union. They initially were trying to say it didn't happen or it wasn't as bad as they were making it out to be. And they wouldn't tell the West the truth. They wouldn't tell, obviously, the Soviet people the truth or anybody in the Warsaw Pact. That caused with glasnost and the openness, that caused this huge reaction within the Soviet body politic, if you will. This inherent lack of trust in the bureaucracy. And then shortly after that, you had the huge earthquake in Armenia in '88, where the Soviet Union was very slow getting in there. They actually had to invite, for the first time, Western countries from around the world to come help them with the disaster, which made the Soviet Union look very weak. And then the other part was when the Soviet bureaucrats got in there, there was a lot of criticism that they weren't doing anything. They weren't helping people. All they were doing was, you know, yelling at people and doing all sorts of things which were classic Soviet bureaucratic behavior, which really irritated the body politic, particularly the republics, because this is one of those republics that eventually broke off and became a separate country. Right. And so that was the other thing. And then you go into '89 with all the problems they had there with that. But then I want to also mention that, you know, one thing that really did in the Soviets was the one institution they ever believed in was the military, which has direct parallels to today, you know, what's going on in Ukraine. They believed that the Soviet military was this incredibly powerful, strong institution. And that even though they couldn't, you know, seem to manage agriculture or industrial production and all this other stuff, the military was this one thing. And then during Desert Storm, we went down there. Keep in mind, it was a Soviet proxy country, Iraq, but Soviet doctrine, Soviet weapons, Soviet, you know, aircraft, Soviet everything. And essentially we went down there and went through them like a hot knife through butter so fast, basically showing that all the Soviet equipment, all the Soviet doctrine couldn't slow down the Western countries. You know, the U.S. went right in there and liberated Kuwait. And I think all these things accumulated. And of course, '89, with the final withdrawal from Afghanistan, right. All of this stuff accumulated And I think it was just too much. I don't think Gorbachev could stop what was happening.
I want to pose to you, though, something Richard Haas, the former head of the Council of Foreign Relations, tweeted today in response, and get your reaction. He said, Gorbachev's life shows little in history is inevitable, that the Cold War did not have to end when and how it did, peacefully and favorably to the West. And we hear the moniker all the time, without a shot being fired, essentially a bloodless collapse of the Soviet Union. I want to get your reaction on that, but we're also getting new reaction from President Biden as he was traveling back from Pennsylvania today on that trip. And this is the statement the White House put out about an hour ago. He says, Mikhail Gorbachev was a man of remarkable vision. When he came to power, the Cold War had gone on for nearly 40 years, and communism for even longer, with devastating consequences. Few high-level Soviet officials had the courage to admit that things needed to change. As a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I saw him do that and more. As leader of the USSR, he worked with President Reagan to reduce our two countries' nuclear arsenals, to the relief of people worldwide praying for an end to the nuclear arms race. After decades of brutal political repression, he embraced democratic reforms. He believed in glasnost and perestroika, openness and restructuring, not as mere slogans, but as the path forward for the people of the Soviet Union after so many years of isolation and deprivation. And it goes on to say, I think we have even further of the statement. It goes on to say, these were the acts of a rare leader, one with the imagination to see that a different future was possible, and the courage to risk his entire career to achieve it. The result was a safer world and greater freedom for millions of people. Even years after leaving office, he was still deeply engaged. When Mr. Gorbachev visited the White House in 2009, he and I spoke for a long time about our country's ongoing work to reduce U.S. and Russian nuclear stockpiles. It was easy to see why so many worldwide held him in such high esteem. And then Biden goes on to say, we send our deepest condolences to his family and friends. But back to that Richard Haas quote, history never inevitable. This could have gone so much worse. And to Biden's statement, he staked his career on this. He's now somewhat viewed in Russia as, and we've been getting reports in that some of the Russian media outlets have described him as a traitor responsible for the fall of the Soviet Union.
It was interesting. You know, in the West, we laud him because he stopped what could have been a horrific end to the the Cold War, which would have been a Third World War. You know, I spent most of the 80s, basically preparing for what could have been that calamitous end, what we thought might happen, and it didn't happen that way. And I have to tell you, as someone, in fact, I was doing a lot of stuff overseas around that time period. In fact, I think I watched the coup in '91 when I was down in Guatemala. Watching this coup taking place, watching CNN in another country, and I remember at the time thinking, okay, this makes sense. They're going to try and, this is classic Soviet sort of stuff. And then it failed. And then by Christmas, the Soviet Union was gone. And I have to tell you, a lot of us, our heads were spinning. There were certain things that were always fixtures. And one was the Cold War. And suddenly the Cold War was completely over with and not a shot had been fired. And it was truly, I'm not saying anticlimactic, but it was the best end I think any of us could have imagined. Now, many will probably go back historically and say we missed the chance to win the peace after the Cold War. We probably should have done something more with the Soviet Union, maybe something on the level of a Marshall Plan. I remember there was big discussion back and forth at the time. We never did, and I think maybe our failure to do that might have been what laid the seeds to eventually Putin coming to power and where we are today. Yeah. Historians will go back and look at that. But he's lauded worldwide for what he did. But within Russia itself, there's a large number, and I think Putin's among them, who kind of revile him. They look at him as basically the person who destroyed the Soviet Union, and they'll never see him in another way.
Okay, Hal, but on the flip side of that, and let's talk about today, because we've been bringing on reporters, experts, like yourself, academics, who essentially say that Putin and Gorbachev essentially hate each other, that they never got along. I want to just read this quote out from Samuel Romani. He's an academic who's been quite prolific about the war in Ukraine on Twitter. He says that one of Gorbachev's final messages came through a close friend and journalist, Alexei Venediktov, which was a scathing rebuke of Putin's current policies. Quote, "What Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev did is all destroyed. All Gorbachev's reforms to zero, to ashes, to smoke." So you go 30 years ago, you couldn't really put the cork back in the bottle until now. Russia is a global pariah. It is very insular. The West and Russia are essentially not on speaking terms because of the war in Ukraine. And maybe there is documented reaction and remarks. I'm not familiar, but has Gorbachev commented when he was still alive about the invasion in Ukraine? Was he for it? Was he against it? What did he think of it?
Basically, he wasn't saying a lot. I understood he didn't, what little I understand, and I don't remember making any big speeches or anything like that on it, but he wasn't very happy with what was going on. He didn't like Putin. He didn't like the way Putin was handling things. But it was everything I have seen, and it's not like I'm a confidant of Gorbachev, so I don't know. But from what I've seen is he was very displeased with what Putin had been doing, particularly the war in Ukraine, and I'm sure he would have many things to say if he was still alive today as well. Unfortunately, his physical situation, from what I understand, was such that he just really didn't have the stamina to be a voice on the world stage. I think if he had been some years earlier, he might have actually traveled around Europe and been a voice that could have made a big change. But it's a little bit of timing on that.
Yeah, and of course, we got the word that Russian state media were reporting he was at the Central Clinical Hospital undergoing treatment for an undisclosed, malady or something for the last couple of days. And then we got the news that he did pass away today. We have this, we were recording on this. The Associated Press put out this live look, Hal, of Red Square there, and you can see the Kremlin. And so I believe, what is it right now? Possibly it's like 6:30 in the morning, Wednesday morning. So Russians will be waking up to this news, presumably. What do you think their reactions are going to be? And I was kind of going back and forth with some people today. Do you think there's going to be a big ceremony, a memorial honoring him?
That's a good question. I was wondering that today as well. And then I would presume that Putin would show up for it, but then there is a possibility because of the basically the bad blood between them that he might have some reason why he can't show up. That's possible, but I would think that he would try and show up for it. But I don't know if it's going to be a very large thing or not, because frankly, Putin's in charge right now, and Putin was not a Mikhail Gorbachev fan, and of course he blames him in so many ways for the fall of the Soviet Union, which Putin has said on more than one occasion, in his mind, was the most catastrophic thing that's ever happened in history. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see if there is a big ceremony. If I would mention here, if a former president, even presidents from other parties that were not necessarily that close to who's in the White House at any given time, we always show respect. The flags at half-mast, there's always a state funeral. I've been involved with a couple of those things, and no matter what, no matter who's in office, we always do that. Yeah. On this one, I don't know if they're going to do that.
Yeah. It will be interesting to see, just to let the viewers know that Putin did issue comments today offering his condolences. So it'll be interesting to see if we see him in the next couple of days, or if there's going to be some type of outpouring of grief and mourning there in Moscow. Time will tell in the next couple of days. Hal Kempfer, as always, thanks for a great conversation. We'll talk again.
Thank you, Andrew.